thanks to the WordCamp powers that be for deciding to run it back in Portland for another year. I really wanted to be here last year, but I just wasn't able to make it. But a fun fact about me is that my freshman year of college, I actually declared as a forestry major. It was short-lived, but to be here at a WordPress conference with a wrap-up event at the World Forestry Center, the serendipity of that is truly crazy. So really excited to be here. I'm really excited to bring this talk today. This talk kind of came from a couple of things. One, although I'm in the development space, I do identify as a UXer at heart. And really thinking about how to make the content management experience really nice for site managers has been something that I've been percolating on and kind of forming this talk from. I've also been fortunate in my WordPress journey. I've been on the agency side, and I've also been in-house and kind of been that liaison between agency and freelance partners and the marketing teams. And I think we all know no two WordPress dashboards are the same. Everybody has their own way of setting things up. And I've been lucky to see a lot of very smart people's approaches and kind of learn from that, see how that gets handed off to marketers, what they respond well to, and what they don't love so much. So this talk is really about how do we build resilient websites, websites that stand the test of time, but maybe more importantly, can grow with site managers, that they can build upon, and that they can really use well into the future. And how do we do that? Leveraging fluid and intrinsic design. So, like everyone, I have a few quick survey questions just to get kind of a poll of the room, and I'll try to adjust things within this presentation a little bit. First off, I'm going to try to see past these lights here, but can I get a show of hands for people who create sites for external stakeholders? So whether you're in an agency, you're a freelancer, or you're in-house, but with the marketing team. Great. Okay. And the opposite of that, is there anyone here today who identifies as a site manager but not a developer? A couple. Okay, cool. Hopefully this gives something for both of you. It will be a little bit more development focused. And then as far as for the developers in the room, how many of you feel super familiar with fluid design? You've done fluid typography and spacing in the theme.json file. You're comfortable with that. Okay, great, great. And then is there anyone here who is thinks they really know intrinsic design? They use container queries like 75% of the time versus traditional ones? A couple people. Awesome. More power to you. I'll try to kind of focus on these more intrinsic as a design system, but we're going to start at the beginning, so don't worry if any of those were foreign terms as well. So let's get into it. I want to start by defining resilience, and spoiler alert, for me, a lot of this comes down to cognitive load. How can we reduce the cognitive load on users so that they can act freely and not worry about breaking things? And quick thank you to my wife for these classy minimalist illustrations. Otherwise, you'd be looking at some truly unhinged clip art right now. So just want to say thanks. And then after that, we'll look at revisiting some design methodologies, how fluid design fits into WordPress, and then moving into kind of this idea of intrinsic design in components and design systems. And we're going to do a workshop demo kind of building some components. And I hope that this is something that you'll be able to walk away from and use in your next project. And I will try to leave some time for Q&A at the end as well. So talking about resilience, I like to break it into two types. The first, I think most of us are very familiar with. This is passive resilience, how the website holds up to external factors, different device sizes, internet speeds, older browsers. I think everyone's pretty familiar with this as kind of a best practice. The second type is what I think is more interesting, and this is how does a site hold up to repeated touches, importantly, from people who do not have the luxury of knowing what areas they should not go digging in. So the non-developers of the site. And again, this to me has a lot to do with lowering cognitive load and intuitive design. Again, I think a lot of us are probably familiar with and have heard responsive versus fluid. And actually in the WordPress space, I think there is a little bit of a versus antagonism between these two sometimes. I think what people are probably most familiar with is this little kind of bar graphic. A lot of time it's defined as, hey, responsive, it's at this breakpoint, things shift. Fluid, it's this smooth thing. I want to give you kind of a different definition because I want to group fluid and intrinsic together. And to me, it's about reactive versus preemptive. When you're designing with traditional responsive media queries, you're kind of having to be reactive by the very nature of it, right? Because if you design a page and it's a full width layout, and you decide, okay, at this size, we need it to stack, what have you, and then later you say, you know what, I'm gonna add a sidebar in here. Now the content width has changed, all those breakpoints have changed, you kind of have to reassess, right? The idea behind moving towards this fluid and intrinsic approach is we're preempting all of this. We're building the adaptability into the component itself, and we're trying to say, how do we build this like CTA or this testimonial block so that it can fit in any context, any window size, and kind of adjust its styles accordingly. And obviously that's not easy, but I think the payoff, and I hope you'll agree with me, the payoff is great. So when I came across this, I thought I have to include this. This is a Twitter poll. It says, do we need responsive settings in the block editor? I'm sure there are some GitHub issue maintainers here groaning somewhere, because obviously this is a topic that's been in the WordPress space for a long time. But what I really want to point out is that third option, and you might not be able to read it, but digitally enhance. I've always wanted to do that. The third option here that says intrinsic is enough and has a little Pinocchio lying emoji there. And I think there is this idea that like it's intrinsic versus responsive. I'm not trying to convince you that responsive design is dead and intrinsic is the future. I think there are people who might try to do that. But this talk today, what I really want to get across is when you lean into intrinsic, you can create some really cool experiences. So starting with the very basics, for those who are not familiar with fluid design, the underlying mechanism is CSS clamp. And if you haven't used this before, basically here we have an element. We're telling it what's the minimum width that it'll ever be, what's the maximum, and then that middle value is often called the preferred value. So basically it's gonna be 50%, but it'll never go smaller than 400 and never go bigger than 650. And this is a really powerful pattern, and I think it's easiest to see this when we look at typography. I apologize, that's a little small. But basically, if we think about traditional media queries, and we have like 6 heading levels, right? And we probably want those headings to be a certain size on desktop, but maybe smaller on mobile, maybe in between on a tablet. That's 6 times 3, 18 different font size declarations. If we use clamp, we get rid of that multiplicative factor. We just have our 6 headings, and we declare this is the smallest this type should ever become. This is the largest it should ever become, and let's smoothly fade between that. So it's a really elegant method. And this slide just points out the one gotcha with typography is that middle value, you usually want to use like viewport width plus a rim or something like that so that users still can adjust the type size. So that makes the middle value a little esoteric. There are lots of generators out there that help you with this and even kind of visualize it. This is called the Fluid Typography Calculator. It's really nice, and you can just kind of copy the values out of it. But the good news with WordPress is you don't even need that. If you've opted in to theme.json, you can just declare a font size as fluid, you give it the minimum and the maximum, and then it'll generate that clamp value for you. So this is a really nice way to kind of dip your toes into fluid design. And for those of you who haven't used this before, this is just kind of, you can see how it works. Like as the window expands and contracts, that type kind of smoothly grows. but it won't ever go beyond a certain size. It kind of locks in at the extremes there. This is also really useful for spacing. If you want a lot of white space on your desktop design, but you don't want people scrolling forever on a phone, you can use this clamp value to really elegantly declare that. Again, there's a lot of great generators. This is called utopia.fyi, and it creates whole typing scales like this. You can create all kinds of things that then you can just plop into your theme.json and be ready to go. Utopia.fyi also has just kind of like one-off if you want to generate these clamp values, because you can use these in a lot of different ways, but spacing and typography are by far the most common. So that was kind of dipping our toes into this idea of fluid at the element or atom level. And I think that's useful to kind of prime us for the next step. But where this gets really interesting is, what about kind of leveraging this idea of intrinsic, of kind of preemptive design in entire components and design systems? And this also starts to kind of affect our block editor experience and has some really, really nice impacts there. And there's been a lot of talks about helping improve the UX of the block editor. Nick Diego had this Curating the Editor Experience WordPress TV episode, and I think there's also a dev blog that goes through all kinds of ways you can kind of make the experience better. Block categories, previews, filtering the controls. But we're not going to talk about any of those today. The fluid and intrinsic approach is kind of coming at this from a different angle. And I want to take a step back and show you why that is. So, are there any UX HCI people in the room? Again, show of hands. Okay, yeah, I see a few. You probably know what this is. This is Don Norman's 7-stage model of interaction. And what this is it's showing kind of the flow of a single action within a software system. And this obviously becomes very automatic, subconscious as you get to know an interface. But if you sit down with someone who's using WordPress for the first time and you watch them kind of put together their first page, you can really watch this play out. So I'm going to click over. This is just a slightly more detailed version. If we pay attention to that left side, it's called the execution side, we can think about, let's say we have a content manager. They have a landing page and they want to increase signups, because don't they always? That's their goal, right? This flow kind of takes them from that to, okay, what do I need to do? That's the kind of cognitive process where they form their intention, which is, hey, I'm going to add a button in the hero that jumps people to the form. That'll get more people to sign up, right? But to go from there to actually doing it, Norman somewhat dramatically calls that the gulf of execution, which sounds like a place in Dante's Inferno, maybe the circle of hell if you don't include descriptions and previews in your custom block. But to bridge that gulf, there's two things at play. One is the user's mental model of the system. So this is for those of us in this room, it's understanding like template hierarchy, what's a pattern, what's a block, how does this kind of drag and drop interface work? But for a novice user, they don't really have that, so they're relying on affordances. And that's what all those things from 2 slides back were when we're talking about previews, categories, limiting the controls. It's all helping to kind of guide users who don't have a mental model that they can fall back on to figure out what they need to do to accomplish their goal. And on the right-hand side, the block editor itself is kind of a huge step forward and just like smoothing out that evaluation process. But what's really exciting about intrinsic and fluid design is instead of kind of focusing on smoothing out that action specification phase for people, we're thinking about how can we actually minimize the cyclic loops that users go through of this. And basically, an example, a user places a block. When they place that block in a traditional kind of responsive sense, they decide where to place it, and then they have to think about, okay, which like style of block makes sense here? Do I check this block style? Do I need to add padding? All these kind of things, and then maybe check it on a tablet, go back, adjust the settings. These are all loops that you're going through. And for someone experienced, not a huge deal. But if it's your first time, this is very cognitively demanding, and it also produces a lot of anxiety because you're trying not to break things. You're trying to change without breaking layouts. So now we're going to make this a little more practical, take a step away from theory, but I want you to keep this loop in mind because that's really kind of the core point of why we're doing what we're doing. So this is a kind of example blog layout. Let's not judge too harshly. I designed it as a demo only. But anyways, I think this is pretty typical. You've got like a hero blog, maybe a couple featured ones, and then a grid, right? Think about how you might approach this for a client site. I can tell you from the ones I've often seen, it would be either kind of like 3 different custom blocks, maybe 3 different patterns, or one block with like 3 different block styles, something like that. Maybe you were thinking one of those too. There's nothing wrong with that. Definitely makes sense depending on the use case. But I do want to point out a couple things about going with that approach. If you go that way, you're, again, kind of designing these with the assumption of like a full width layout, right? And let's say the user then decides, you know what would make sense? I kind of want to like have a couple of my blog posts featured in the footer of my site all the time. That would be nice. That would get people to read them. So they take the featured post block and drop it in a column in the footer. That's not going to work. It's not designed to do that. So the user has to think about the type of block and the context where it's going and kind of bridge these two together. And that's not an easy task. And again, it opens up the door for things to break. Also, as a developer, you're now worrying about 3 entities. So you have to kind of think about each of these separately and address each of them. Here's another example. You can tell I was rewatching Bake Off when I was making this. So this is Paul Hollywood telling you to go light on the buttercream. Admittedly, this is contrived to have like 3 different testimonial styles on one page, but I think we've all seen like a Figma file of a whole site where you see different types of testimonials or call-outs or what have you. Again, you could do this in like 3 different blocks or block styles, but for the user, that's meaning they have to, pick like, oh, I have 2 columns, so probably what makes sense here is the mini quote block or what have you. With intrinsic blocks, the idea is the blocks style themselves based on the context of their container. So the user places it, the block decides what it should look like based on where it's been placed. So here's that in action with the testimonial. The user's dragging it around to different columns. The block is shifting its design to the design that makes the most sense based on the width of those columns, right? The user doesn't have to decide which block, they don't have to decide which style. And on the developer end, you're not producing 3 blocks anymore. You're producing 1 block that's part of the design system as a whole, and then that block morphs based on the context that it goes to. So all of this is powered by container queries under the hood. And there's a lot to these. I encourage you to look up the spec if you're curious about this. I don't have time to go into everything, but I'm going to show you kind of the basics, right? The basic idea is that you have an outer container where in CSS you declare container type, and 90% of the time you'll say inline size, which just means we're caring about the width of this container. Once you've done that, you can use the @container just like you would a media query. Declare a width and give it conditional CSS. But this is really, really powerful because you're telling it now to care about the size of its context. So you can, have a block that behaves differently whether you put it in the main content, in a sidebar, in the footer. It's decoupled from the window width and instead just kind of looks at its own context. And this allows content editors to freely drag blocks wherever they want, and they don't have to worry about breaking the site because we've kind of taken care of that ahead of time for them. So this is really well supported. 92%. For whoever's out there being like, I don't use any CSS unless it's 100%, you can also really approach this from a progressive enhancement mindset, and that is what we will do now. So I'm gonna hop over to my laptop, and let's see, it might take a minute for this to pop up on the screen, but let's see here. Give it just a second. All right. So we've got this example from earlier of my Paul Hollywood quote block, right? And right now we have it in kind of its most basic form, right? And this is how I'd recommend approaching building things like this, is you look at your design file and you say, okay, I have these different kind of styles of quotes. I'm gonna build a block that kind of makes this system for me, right? And I'll start with the one that kind of works the best. This one, I think we can agree, none of these look horrible, right? This one looks pretty wonky, but it's not, there's nothing that's like broken text overflowing. So from there, we can kind of just progressively add layers to this. So the first thing that I would do, let me pull up the code editor and I'll zoom in here so that you can see. First off, I want to point out, there's not a whole lot that changes to use this approach. The only thing, for me, I'm making this as a custom block. The only thing I'd point out is usually I'll kind of add one extra div wrapper so that the outermost wrapper I can put that container type on, and then everything inside it I can apply conditional styling to. And that just makes it, again, kind of a self-contained unit. So you see that testimonial block inner. Oh, here, let me full screen this for you. That's probably a little better, right? So then in the CSS, I'll zoom in here a little extra. We've got that inline size container type property, and that's gonna enable us to do a bunch of cool stuff. The first thing I'm gonna do is introduce some fluid type. So in reality, I will say normally I'd probably let like theme.json style this, but I really wanted to show you one cool thing with container queries is that then with this clamp function, you get access to another unit, which is CQW, or container query width. So now the font size is actually going to scale with the size of the testimonial block itself, not the viewport. So when I save this real quick and we switch back and take a look now, you can see when we have a big full width block, it bumps that type size up. When it's a mini block, it scales it back down. And already, like, that's looking a lot better. It looks a lot more natural. And as we scale this, you can kind of see the type responds as well as these components scale up and down. But we can go a lot farther. And for the next step, usually I'll say, okay, what's the worst looking one? I'm gonna address that first. Again, I think this big one is kind of the worst looking one. So I'll go into code and I'll make a container query that says above 650 pixels, apply these styles. And I'm not going to go into all the styles because it's just CSS. You can do pretty much anything. So I'll activate that one, and now we've got this new style that applies when the block has enough room to apply it. And then I'll just kind of go through and add complexity to the system as we see fit. So now maybe I want that medium one to look a little different. Again, it's just looks a lot like a media query. We're just saying between these two sizes, add these extra styles. Refresh again, and now we've got these 3 different quote styles that get applied automatically based on the context of the quote block itself. And I want to show you some other kind of bonuses of this on the editing side. So we already saw that like it responds dragging around. We can drag it around and it'll kind of shift its design based on its context. So there it actually can still fit that one. But if we scale, it sizes down to the mini block. It can fit the hero one there. And we're back to the regular one, right? But there's a couple other really cool things. One is a classic problem in the block editor, which I'm going to adjust my screen here just to make it extra apparent, is that if you're using responsive design, your block editor preview kind of gives you a false preview. And what I mean by that is if you've used traditional media queries, it's looking at the size of this whole window. But when you're in the block editor, your content, if you're in a small window like this, it's maybe half 2/3 of that. So your content will get more squished than it ever would for a visitor. And again, for us, if we kind of understand why that is, like, no big deal, I can understand that and get over it. But if you don't understand that, it's kind of disconcerting to see stuff broken and then be like, preview, oh, that looks good, so I guess we're cool, publish. That's not a great experience. When you lean into this intrinsic approach, one of the bonuses is these quotes don't care about the window. So you can see, as I toggle this side panel, that quote is actually responding. So even this subsetted window is giving you a one-to-one experience of what the site would look like if it was in a window this size. And I really like that. I think that's a super cool bonus. And just to show you how robust this is, another example is, I think the example I said earlier is kind of the nightmare of, like, you design a whole page and then someone goes in and says, you know what, I think I'm just going to throw a sidebar on here, right? And they go in and pick a sidebar template. With traditional media queries, that could cause a lot of things to break. In this case, we pop it open, nothing's going to break. This first quote, the style is going to change, but that's exactly what we want. We want it to use the style that makes sense based on the layout, right? So now I want to transition to the other example, this blog layout, because this one is a little bit different, and I'm going to highlight a couple different things here. One of the things I like about intrinsic design is that it is kind of a progressive enhancement by its nature. So if we think about this as a mobile view, all of our posts are going to display in this card format. That's kind of our base format that we're working from. And that works, right? There's not a ton of visual interest to this, but the card is a really nice experience on mobile. You see all the information you need. It's not taking up too much room. It's a good experience. But as you add screen real estate, more visual interest, more hierarchy is going to be added as the space becomes available. And that's just all kind of handled by the components themselves. You don't have to think about, like, oh, maybe I want to, add this different block to get a little extra pizzazz to my page. It's all just kind of built into a single post pattern. So let's edit this page real quick. I want to show you how this one works because it's a little different. Instead of a custom block here, I'm using the query block. So all I've done is applied CSS. And basically, what I've made the experience to be is, let me close this so you can see. Here's our post query for this main grid area, right? And we've got the post template. I've added an extra group, just like I did with the custom block that I can apply that container type to. But now what this enables is, if a site manager is kind of building out an archive page, all they need to decide is how they want the structure of the columns. So, like, ooh, I want this one hero, then I want a couple featured, then I want like a few columns of 3, then let's do another featured. This is super common for publication sites to kind of add that breakup of the different posts and kind of just give it some dynamism. But all they have to worry about, instead of like trying to kind of build that from different blocks and figure out how it all works, you could have one pattern that they use, and it's just the post display. And all they have to do is go in here and decide how many columns they want it to be. So if I knock this down to 2 columns, it's going to choose this featured post. 1 column, it'll make it look like a hero post. I actually made a tiny variant for this with just the image and the title so that you can crank this up to like 8 columns, which is kind of ridiculous. But that just shows you how resilient this system is. You can just decide how you want these to be displayed with this single slider here. So again, the content manager, all they're thinking about is how many posts do I want to display and in how many columns, and that's it. So that removes a lot of concerns for them. And once again, just to kind of prove this point, we could take this big hero right here. We can make it a pattern. Let's call it my posts. We're going to add it. And then let's say, oops, my bad, I had the wrong block selected here. I'm going to take the whole query block here, create a pattern, my posts, right? And we're not going to make it synced. And then I could get real crazy here. I could say, okay, I'm changing this template to a sidebar template. Again, kind of a crazy move, no big deal. Our posts adapt. They choose a different design, but they maintain the hierarchy. Then I can go in here, edit the site itself, and in my sidebar, I can say, I want to put that my post pattern that displays my post, right? And even though it's this big hero block is where I created it, when I place it here, it just becomes a card, right? Because it knows there's not enough space to display as a hero. What it's inheriting is just that it's displaying a single post. So that's how flexible this is you can get it to where you can create a pattern where the pattern is basically the canonical source of post display. But then all the user has to do is tweak one or two values and all the styles adapt automatically. So that kind of wraps up the demo here. I'm going to move back to the slides and I'll give it a second here for the display to change. There we go. I do just want to kind of recap real quick where we came from. So with responsive design, where we started, we have the site manager. They create a layout. They put their blocks where they want them. Then they kind of see how that works. They adjust the settings on the blocks. They look at another device, adjust some more settings, repeat that for however many breakpoints or settings they need to look at, and then you publish, right? That's a pretty demanding workflow. Where we're trying to go, and I'll admit this is a little optimistic, but the idea is we're trying to get to, they create a layout, they place the blocks where they want them, and that's it. The blocks themselves decide what styles make sense in the layout that they've designed, and they're just able to publish that. They don't have to worry about, oh, did I pick the right blocks? Did I pick the right block style for this context? And what I mean by device agnostic at the bottom there, because we're designing this kind of in isolation, we're designing these systems to work regardless of where they're placed, it's kind of thinking into the future of, hey, these components are self-contained. My little testimonial block, I could place this on a website that someone's going to view on their Apple Air with a trapezoid display, or the Google Home 26 that's like round and has, I don't know, an extra like little dongle on it. It doesn't matter. The component itself decides the layout. So this is a really nice approach for just building things that will work in the future. Before I open it up to questions, a couple closing thoughts here. I know for the agency people in the room and freelancers, oftentimes at the end of a project, when you get to CMS training, you know, you're at the tail end. Maybe you're running up against budget. Maybe you're running up against time. The client is like, give me the keys to the site. I want to go run with this. It's, you know, you might spend 30 minutes saying, this is WordPress. Here's how you use the dashboard. Here's the keys. Now, you know, call me if you have questions, right? But I want to encourage you to think about the next time you do a CMS training, book it for twice your normal time or maybe more, and think of it as a usability study. Give your normal spiel, but then have a couple pre-prepared tasks and let them work through it. This will do two things. One, they'll learn the site so much better. They'll actually walk away knowing what they're doing, and, you know, instead of being like, thank you so much for this training, and definitely remembering everything 3 months from then when they need to publish a press release at the last minute, they have some reps. They have that muscle memory of how this all works. But secondly, I guarantee you'll walk away with something that you can put in your next project and kind of iteratively improve this experience for the end user. So I am going to open it up to questions now. I know we covered a lot in this, but I think I hope that you're excited about the idea of intrinsic design. I know it's a little bit different, but it's actually, there's not that much from the development standpoint that changes. It's really just kind of a mindset shift, and I think it opens up some exciting possibilities. So I'd love to hear if you have gears spinning for projects you think you could use this on, or if you've used it on a project in the past. Yeah, there's 2 mics with aggressive spotlights on them. If anyone is brave enough, please, yeah, ask questions if you have them. All right, I see someone.
Hello, my name is Matt, and actually just a few weeks ago I started playing with the clamp function for the first time. I saw this presentation on the schedule, and one of my coworkers had been talking to me about it, and started playing with it. And one of the little quirks I experienced with typography was line height, and line height shifting between lines. Have you found a good solution for that?
That's a great question. That is a tricky thing. I will say I have seen, and I don't think I've personally had to implement this. I haven't had an issue where I needed to, but I have seen people who actually add a clamp to the line height as well. So both of them are kind of responding to the viewport width. So you're tying your typography size and line height back together. So then they're kind of coupled again. And admittedly, there's some finagling to make that work. It's definitely not like super straightforward. Just take your copy and paste the same clamp function. But that will get you there to where those are now linked again. Hopefully that answers the question. Great.
Hi there. Were you here for the last talk?
Unfortunately, I was in the back, but I actually, right after it, I was like, we should talk tomorrow because I feel like there are some synergies.
Yeah, definitely. There was a question that was asked at the end, and I'm going to try to, summarize it. And I'm new to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But the question was, once we give it into the client's hands, get it into the client's hands, they're just going to mess it up. And is there, solutions like word limits and stuff like that?
Yep.
So I'm going to ask you that question.
Yeah, I heard that question, and it is a great question. And I think my answer is, I think, the word count is a specific example that I'm not as sure about, but I think that this approach in general is actually a really great way to address a lot of those issues where, the client, my example of putting the featured post in the footer, that's an excellent example of like, if you didn't train the client, hey, this featured post block needs to go on a full page, don't put it anywhere else. If you approach it this way, that's no longer needed. Like they can put that block anywhere, that block is always gonna work. So I do think this addresses, I'll be bullish and say this addresses like 85 or 90% of that. And then maybe there are some concerns that like the text, I'm not sure that this necessarily addresses if someone, copies in a quote that's 3 paragraphs long. That's probably gonna look a little weird no matter what, but it's not gonna like run off the page or something weird like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
2 questions. First, I was not familiar with the clamp function before.
Okay.
So this question is, how does that relate to when you're building a site or building a page, messing with web, tablet, and cell phone? Does that obviate that function for you if we would use that?
Yeah. So they're kind of 2 things. In some ways, yes. Like at the element level, the clamp takes care of that for you because you're saying, okay, this font is just going to smoothly scale as the device gets smaller. It doesn't necessarily, like using the clamp by itself doesn't necessarily remove all need for responsive design. And that's where like the kind of next level of that is building the components so that they react. But a kind of hybrid approach would be to use that clamp function to have fluid typography, but then you would still maybe use responsive for your columns to tell them to stack at a certain breakpoint, right? So it kind of handles like the smallest elements level of responsiveness. I hope that clears things up.
And this, when you looked at, when you set the thing up and you reconfigured it, the blocks actually changed around a lot.
Yeah.
What made that happen?
So that's the container query, and that's something I'd encourage you to look up container queries. There's a lot of really good info on it, and unfortunately with the time I just couldn't go super deep. So I just wanted to show you kind of like what's possible in the very basics. But yes, that basically is just like a media query, but instead of caring about the window width, it cares about the width that component itself takes up, which is really powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, this is a totally new concept to me, and admittedly, I'm not a technical person, but one of the things that we frequently struggle with our clients is image size and focal point. Can this handle specifications for that, especially when you have clients reviewing stuff and trying to prove stuff on a giant monitor, but 70% of their traffic comes from mobile devices?
That is a very good question. Man, I wish I had been like asked this question while I was making these demos so that I could like spin up a demo, because that's such a good use case and I don't want to answer you inaccurately. I think tentatively that the answer is yes, you could set something up that would help with that. Actually, I'll be wandering the halls tomorrow, so would love to chat more and maybe learn about your use case, because I think there is a way that this can help play into that. I don't know that it would 100% solve that problem, because yeah, the focal point in particular can be tricky if you have an image where you need to be focusing in an extreme corner and then they swap it out for a totally different image. That's a hard thing to deal with. But yeah, I would find me in the hallways.
I'll come find you, thanks.
Yeah. Hi, yeah.
Hello. I'm Luke. I'm wondering, technically speaking, for the container media queries for the Gutenberg block getting larger or smaller and responsive, is that done with JavaScript, or is it done with something that generates a bunch of different CSS
So it's
values,
just the CSS, and that's what I really like about the container queries is it really is, you don't have to add a lot of overhead. It is just CSS, and you write them essentially the exact same way as a media query. So in my example with like the testimonial, when you saw the image kind of like shifting off to the side, right? All that's happening there is it's basically a media query, but it's the container query that says @container. And then I'm switching it to a display grid so that it's moving into a 2-column layout and just shifting some stuff around. So it's the same approach that you would take if you kind of built that quote and then you were, scaling the page up and down saying, okay, when it gets smaller, maybe I'll like absolutely position the image and make it rounded. We're doing kind of really similar things. It's just by using this container approach, you get a lot of added benefits.
It's not generating a lot of CSS or doing it in a JavaScript way.
Yeah, no, it's actually the CSS is just standard. I actually on these examples don't even have like a Sass compiler or anything like that. It's just a straight up .css file. So it doesn't require a ton of extra configuration. And yeah, I should also. I will make these demos available. I'm going to scoot forward on the slide. I do have a QR code. Definitely connect with me in person. Like I said, I'll be wandering around. But also, I have all my like socials on that. And I'll probably tomorrow try to post a GitHub link to these styles so you can take a look at them and see. I know I didn't go super in-depth on the CSS, but that would probably be helpful for you to take a look at. And I am at time. But I will be right out there if you want to find me. I don't want to get chided by my superiors. But thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this talk.